Hello and welcome back to another Django tutorial. So this is a preliminary type of tutorial where we're just setting up some of the different tutorials that we're going to need to start utilizing AWS Lambda and the API Gateway. Now, if you don't know what that is, I'll give you a quick overview in this tutorial, but this tutorial really is designed as a throwaway tutorial. So this will go out of date really quickly. So I want to keep this nice, short and sharp, to the point, quickly guide you on how to perform this action that we set here in this tutorial. And like I said, so we can update it, throw it away and update it and make a new one as and when we need to. But as of recording this tutorial, this works exactly how it was intended. So this is deploying a Django application to AWS Lambda and the API Gateway with Zappa. So the process that we're going to go through here is create a new Django application. This is just going to be a standard, brand new application. And then we're going to go through creating a new IAM user in AWS, and we're going to set some permissions that Zappa is going to need in order to deploy Django onto these AWS services. So we'll go ahead and install Zappa, and then we'll deploy, and that will be then the end of this tutorial. So like I said, the whole point here is just to deploy Django as quickly and easy as possible to give you a general idea on how to do it, get you comfortable with some of the different services and different tools that you'll need to utilize if you're not familiar with AWS, the IAM user and setting permissions. And it allows you then just to go off and explore some of the different options, because no doubt there'll be lots of questions after this tutorial, because it isn't really a full tutorial in terms of we're not going to then go ahead and deploy the database and so on. This is just a simple case of deploying Django, a bog standard brand new Django application onto the AWS Lambda and API Gateway service. So not intended to be a complete guide. Let's just remember that the traditional server approach is online 24/7, regardless whether we're processing requests or not. Typically in this approach, we're processing requests when required, one by one, and we generate a queue of requests. Of course, this queue could get really large, depending on the amount of requests we have, and that could then potentially end up causing problems. Typically, this type of approach doesn't scale automatically. For example, of course, we can scale up this service, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself towards that type of approach. So one of the services that we're going to be utilizing, or Zappa allows us to deploy onto, is the AWS Lambda. So this is a AWS service, which is an event-driven service. So it's considered serverless. So here it runs the code, our Django code, in response to events. So anytime anyone makes a request to the server, the AWS service will automatically manage that resource that's needed for that particular request. So think in comparison to the traditional HTTP server that's always on 24/7, this only works, this only gets initiated when someone makes a request. Therefore, you're only paying for the compute time that's been consumed. So this in some situations will considerably lower the cost of the service that you're paying for over traditional approaches where you're paying for a server 24/7. This tutorial won't really cover the real core of what Lambda offers us. Like I said, it really just is a simple installation guide, but that's just one of the benefits that this service can provide us. In addition to that, we'll also be utilizing, or Zappa will allow us to utilize the Amazon API Gateway. So just think of this as the front door to your application. It allows you to create, publish, maintain, and monitor and secure the API at any scale. And this is what I want to move into, utilizing Django API with these services. So the Amazon API Gateway is a fully managed service. It allows us to create, publish, maintain, monitor, and secure APIs at scale. That's the important part. It allows and supports RESTful APIs and WebSocket APIs, so it will allow us to create fully synchronous applications. Again, you are just paying for the requests that you receive and for the bytes that are transferred. So that can also lower the costs of deployment over traditional HTTP servers, which again are on 24/7. So Zappa makes it possible for us to utilize these technologies. The general flow of what's happening here is the user will make a request to the service as per normal, and that then goes through the API gateway. So the API gateway will then fire up the server inside of our Lambda function. So this is our Django is essentially going to be installed as a Lambda function, essentially. Lambda functions is something that we can definitely explore in later tutorials, and it really is the power of this service. And then the server is then fed the request. So this is obviously Django. So we handle the request by Django app through the WSGI layer, and then it just goes through the process then of working out what data we need, and then it obviously gets returned back to the user. So in comparison to, for example, the traditional HTTP server where the requests are processed one by one, here each request is given its own virtual HTTP server, for example, by the Amazon API Gateway. So this then enables ABS to kind of handle the horizontal scaling automatically so that the requests never time out through being in a queue, for example. Okay, so I apologize for the very brief overview there of these technologies. It really is kind of an hour lecture, really, to give you a complete overview, and it's probably better read than just to listen to someone actually trying to explain it. So let's just head over to now the deployment of Django. So let's first of all go ahead and create a new virtual environment folder, and then we'll just go in as per normal, and we'll just activate that. And then we go ahead and create just a standard Django application. I'll go ahead and install Django, pip install Django. And then, of course, we'll go ahead and just create a new project. We're going to make it a new folder called core and then put the application inside of there. So go ahead and do that. And then, of course, we just go ahead and just run the server just to check that everything is okay. And there we go, just a bog standard Django application. You will need an AWS account, so go ahead and sign up if you haven't already done so, and then sign in, and I'll see you in the admin area. We now need to make a new user, so we need to head over to IAM, Services, and create a new user. So let's go to Users and add a new user. So I'm just going to call this serverless. And then just double check the access type. So we're going to need programmatic access for this task. So go ahead and do that. So we don't want them to be able to sign in using the AWS Management Console. So let's give them programmatic access and press next. And then here, we're not going to do anything just now. We're going to add some permissions shortly. So let's just press next. And then here we've got some additional tags, which we can just press next. And there we go. So let's just create the user. So what we're going to need here is the access key and the secret access key. So go ahead and download that. So we need that shortly. And you will probably find that you won't have access to the secret access key other than this window here. So when we close and we go back into the user and go to security credentials, you can see that we don't then have access. So we need to keep that file that we've just downloaded and store it. If we do need to make another access key, you'll need to go ahead and use this option here, create access key, and download it again. And then just delete this access key here. So what we're trying to do here is we're setting up a new user that's going to access the services that we need to utilize in order to set up Django in this serverless environment. So we'll work through the permissions shortly, but we just needed to get this key so that we can set up AWS in our console in order for us to utilize Zappa within our development environment or within our computer. So now we're going to go ahead and activate or install Zappa. So Zappa is a tool that's going to allow us to deploy our Django application onto AWS in a serverless environment. so that we can utilize Django in the AWS Lambda service and utilizing the API Gateway. So this package here is basically going to package up our application, send it across to AWS and deploy it in the environment. So it's super easy. We'll go ahead in a second and just pip install this into our environment. So all we need to do here is pip install. Just make sure you're doing this in your virtual environment, of course. So now we have Zappa ready. We now need to allow Zappa to contact or to communicate or connect to AWS. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use our credentials that we downloaded earlier when we created a new user. So we need to utilize that so to set up an AWS configuration on our computer. And then we're going to point Zappa to that configuration, which has our access keys to access our AWS service as the new user that we created. This is a Windows installation guide. We're not utilizing Linux, or we're not currently utilizing containers yet. We will move into that and I'll give you an installation guide utilizing Docker. But this is just pure Windows at the moment. So I've gone ahead to the AWS guide here, installing, updating, and uninstalling the AWS CLI. So we're going to need to download the AWS CLI to create some files that Zappa is going to need in order to make this connection to AWS so it can set up our Django package. So it's just this MSI file here. Just download that, install it. There's just a few options, next, and that will install. So this is going to give you a command line tool. So we can type in AWS and just double check it's installed. So there we go. We've got the AWS CLI installed. You can't quite see that. There we go. So that's all ready to go now. So as long as you've got to this point here and you've got a version of CLI, you can see that I'm using 2.054 and I've got Python 3.7.7 installed. It's worth noting at this point that I did have a problem with some older packages of Python, and I did update to 3.7 because of that. So I have tested this installation before I'm showing you. So that was a case that I had to deal with in this instance. Of course, over time that's going to change. So this is why I'm trying to make this a small tutorial, a quick kind of straightforward tutorial so that I can keep updating it when it does stop working. So now we're going to generate the file that we need Zappa to utilize in order to connect to our AWS service and deploy our Django application. So we just need to type in AWS and then configure. That's going to then prompt us to access or enter our access key. You can see that I've already entered one previously, and this is why you're seeing this. And I can just overwrite that by adding in a new key. So same again with your secret access key. So remember, these keys are what you downloaded when you created a new user earlier. So just copy and paste them in. And your region, here I'm just using EU West 2. So this is important because at the time of recording this, I don't think that the API service is available in all regions. So why I mention this is because sometimes I've seen, for example, these are obviously the regions, US East, etc. But sometimes I've seen a letter after the 1 or the 2. So just make sure that you don't have that letter after the 1s or 2s, because I don't believe that configuration will work. I've had problems in the past when that is the case, and I'm not entirely sure how that came about. But just make sure that you're utilizing the single integer rather than the integer and a letter afterwards. Okay, so that's your region. And then the default output, I've just selected JSON. So I've typed in JSON initially. And there we go. So that's the setup. And what that is going to do, that's going to create a file which we can now point to Zappa and allow then Zappa to actually connect to AWS on our behalf, utilizing the user that we set up with these credentials. So in the spirit of just getting this working, we want to now move back into the IAM service and just go back to our user, because what we need to do now is set up some permissions. So we want this user to be able to configure all of the settings and all the services that we need, or that Zappa needs, in order to then automatically configure and deploy our Django server onto AWS. So this is definitely an area where you could spend hours reading through all the different examples and policies, etc. But like I said, in the spirit of just getting this working, I'm just going to give you a general policy which you can utilize and then tailor later. And we can discuss this in later tutorials, how to minify this and have a look at really cutting this down to ensure that the user only has exactly what it needs to get this service working. By all means, have a look through the IAM policy examples for managing the API gateway. That's just really one area, and that's just a link from the Zappa documentation, but it doesn't really take you through exactly what you need to get completely started here. You can look online and just type in Zappa AWS policies. People have gone through that process of spending those hours really kind of pruning those policies to ensure that the user that we've created only has the permissions that they need. So just to quickly recap, we now have AWS set up. So we have a new user and the privileges have been set so that Zappa can deploy our Django application. We've installed, or we created a new Django application, just a brand new Django application, and we've installed Zappa, and now we're ready to allow Zappa to deploy our Django application to AWS. And let's not remember, it does that through the fact we've created a AWS configuration file with our secret keys on our machine, and it's going to utilize that to authenticate to the AWS server and actually then go ahead and perform the deployment. So now we need to think about actually adding some permissions to a user. So we created this user here called serverless. So let me just show you how to actually apply a permission to this user. So go ahead and click into it and we can add a permission. So you can see I've added or created a permission here. So let's just add a permission. Now what we can do here is create a new permission. To do that, we create a group. And then what we can go do now is create a new policy. So we do that, and then we can then copy and paste the policy inside of this JSON area. So that's the code that I give you. You can just go ahead and copy and paste it into there and press review policy. Now, this isn't a simple process to explain exactly what is needed because it's not necessarily 100% clear from reading the Zappa documentation exactly what's needed or how to set it up. So there are some others online that have gone through this process. So I'll link you to this gentleman's efforts who's generated this policy here. So what you need to do is just copy the policy and then go back in and then paste it into here and then press review policy. And that's then going to give you a list of all the different things that you're going to need access to, or in this case, not you're going to need access to, or Zappa is going to need in order to deploy your application. So once you've got that set, you can go ahead and give it a name and then press create policy. So that's creating a policy. Now we just need to attach it to a user. So let's just go back to users, go to the user and then go to add permissions. And now we can attach it directly by searching and then selecting and then press next and then add permission. And there we go. So that's how to add a permission. So like I said, I'll leave you some instructions in the file that's in the project. Now, there is one thing that I couldn't get around. So let's just go back into, for example, this user here. So this user here has got 3 policies. Now, I've had to give it this IAM full access in order to get Zappa to work. This could probably be pruned down a little bit more, and you can probably remove this once you finish the deployment in actual fact, because you won't need full access after you've deployed to the IAM full access, privileges. Now, if you want to add this, then just follow what I've just said, add permissions, go to attach, and then type in IAM and then select that full permission to add that in. And I did start to play around with the permissions, and I've created these 2 items here, which you'll find in the text file in the repository. One's going to be called Django Lambda, and one's going to be called Django Zappa. And then there's a third policy, which is going to be this one here, which I haven't tested out in actual fact, but it should include everything you need to get started. So to confirm, you could try this policy here, and you're going to need the I am full access attached to the user in order to get this working. Or else you can try these two plus I am full access. These here would definitely work for you. So that's what you need to add. So add some new policies, attach them to your user, like I've just shown you. So this is a user called Django, and these are the policies. And like I said, this process works absolutely okay. So what we need to do now is initiate Zappa. So we type in Zappa and init for initialize, and you can see here we've now got some different options. So we're just going to go ahead and use some of the defaults. So the environment is going to be called dev. So here we're using the AWS Lambda API Gateway. So you can see what's happened here. It's going to find that default profile that we created. So we're just going to select default, and now we've been asked about uploading files. So our Django application is going to be packaged up and then put onto a S3 bucket. Now we can create a new folder if we wanted to and define that folder, or we can just allow Zappa to do that. You can see this is going to be the name of the bucket that it creates on our S3 platform. So we can just use the defaults unless you want to use your own. So you can definitely set that up. Okay, so now it's looking for the Django settings file. So we're using the application core. So it's looked in core and settings. So we can just press enter again. And now we're being asked whether we want to deploy this globally. So do we actually want to deploy this around the world? No, we don't. So this is just going to be deployed on one server, say, and so that we can just practice and see it working. So we type in the letter N, and then we check the final configuration, and then we press Y, and then press enter, and now we're ready to deploy. So you can see what's happened here, that Zappa's now made a configuration for uploading. So this is our configuration right here. You can see it's taken the region from the configuration file that we created earlier. So let's go back, and now what we need to do is deploy. So we just type in Zappa deploy, and then the name, which was dev. So this is going to take a couple of seconds. So the process here, it's going to package up Django, zip it up, and then send it across to our S3 bucket, and then go ahead and finish off the configurations. And then finally, we should be provided a link then to our new service, and we should be able to then just see Django working. Of course, there's one more step that we need to do, because we need to go into the settings and allow or authorize Django on the domain that we're going to be utilizing, but we don't know what that is yet until we've actually deployed. So we're just going to wait for the deployment and then go ahead and change that. Okay, so we do have a problem. It's just a warning. So this is exactly what I wanted to show. So remember, this is just a quick demonstration of getting this working. Now, there are going to be a few problems, and there's going to be a few different workarounds, which I'm not going to fix in this tutorial, but we're just going to get started utilizing. So what's handy about this is we can now think about, well, how do we actually overcome some of these problems? But first of all, let's just go back into the AWS service. And now we're just going to go to the Lambda service. And what we should see now is our new application, so core dev. You can see that it has been deployed, and we can go in, and there's not too much that we can look at the moment here. So we're running 3.8. We've got the memory. It's a Zappa deployment. So there's not too much there going on. We've got some permissions. So this does mean that our permissions have worked. So if you got this far, it does mean that our permissions are okay. And we've got some monitoring as well, if we want to have a look at that, but obviously there's not too much to monitor at the moment. Just to show you what's happening, to give you a general idea, if we go back to these services and just go to S3 now, you will also see that there is a new folder that's been deployed. Here it is. So if I go inside of this folder, you can see that there is currently nothing inside of this, because what's happened is that Zappa has used this temporarily to create the deployment. So there doesn't look like there's anything in here, or sorry, there won't be anything in here. So that was just a deployment requirement for Zappa to upload the files before it then deploys onto the AWS service. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see if we can troubleshoot this. So what we got is a tool. We can, for example, Zappa and tail to have a look at the tail of the error file. So you can see here that, let's just get up to where we need to be. So this is a deployment. So you can see here it says SQLite 3.8.3 or later is required, and it found 3.7.17. So that was fairly simple to fix. So we just need to update SQLite. Now I'm using Windows here, and I'm not going to go through the process of updating to SQLite 3.8.3, but you can clearly see that is a requirement. Now, the likelihood is that you'll probably want to use a Postgres database, for example. So that isn't too much of a problem at the moment, but let's just go into the core. So just to get this working, let's just go ahead and we're just going to take out the database and then press save. And then what we can do now is just go back. We're just going to double check anything else, if there's any other problems. Doesn't look like it was just a database problem, it looks like. So Control C that. So now let's deploy again. So instead of using deploy dev, what we can now do is use the Zappa update dev. So it's essentially going to go through the same process. It's going to upload again. You're going to look and see it go through a similar process. So we just need to wait for that. And there we go. So once that's successful, you can see that we now have your updated Zappa deployment is live. So now we can go ahead and look at that. So let's go into a new tab and have a look. And you can see we've got this problem. So we've got the disallowed host because, like I said, we can't currently access that because we need to update the settings. So I'm just going to take this link here, this link with the .com, and I'm just then going to go back into the Django app, go into settings, and of course I just need to update the allowed hosts. Okay, and then just save that, and then just go ahead again and just update. So now that we've redeployed the application, you can see that I've changed out my application here to include a home page. So you can see that it clearly works and is now running. We should be able to use this as a normal Django application. So if I go into admin, for example, you can see that I can go into admin. Obviously, the styling isn't in place because we haven't actually mapped this across to the CSS, etc. We didn't actually do a migrate because, again, we're not using a database at this point. So that's something that we need to do in a later tutorial. So just to reiterate, I wanted to make this quick tutorial for you on how to deploy. This is obviously the first stage, just to get familiarized with some of the deployment processes. Now, the reason why I haven't chained this with actually then connecting it to a Postgres database and so on is because it's likely that those processes don't change as much as the deployment process. So I can quickly change this tutorial as and when I need to, when the deployment changes or the deployment process changes. As we use higher versions of the Zappa software and the database. You saw MySQLi, for example, and also Django when that moves up to the next version. So all these type of parameters here may affect deploying. If you have a look online, other people have experienced different problems with version 3 of Django. But this is the latest version as of speaking, as of creating this tutorial. And you can see that everything should deploy, apart from we need to upgrade the SQLite database. So just thank you for listening, and I do hope that was useful, and I didn't set you up to something that wasn't advertised at the very beginning of the tutorial. Hopefully now you can think about exploring some of these services a little bit more. Of course, we'll follow up this tutorial with many other tutorials in this, what's going to be a new series eventually. So this is just a groundwork just to get and give you a flavor of what's going to be expected. And so you can start looking and thinking about utilizing these type of technologies.